Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are out there in the world, welcome to the High Wire. Many of you are brand new, joining us for the first time on the High Wire. You've heard about the reporting that is taking place only here. This is nothing like mainstream media. Today's show, virtually every piece of scientific evidence in it is going to fly in the face of the paradigm being described to us by the United States government, many of the government agencies around the world, and scientists that are at the top of health agencies around the world. This makes this broadcast, I think, difficult and somewhat dangerous in a climate where we're beginning to censor people who have a difference of opinion. But here's what we now know. There is no longer scientific consensus across the world when it comes to COVID-19. There is now a divide that is growing every day between scientists, between virologists, between MDs, between mathematicians, on whether or not we are correct on COVID-19, whether or not we were right on the numbers, and whether or not we've been treating it correctly. I'm going to be meeting with one of those top world-renowned mathematicians later in the show. Knut Witkowski is going to be talking to me about the math as someone who understands how we should be looking at the models. He thinks we've made a tragic mistake in how we've dealt with COVID-19. I'm also going to be talking to Mike Cernovich, who is an author. He's a journalist, and he is a filmmaker who has been really digging deep into how we are manipulated by the press and how incorrect the press can be and how it moves to bring us mistruths. He's breaking a story today that you will see here on the High Wire. But first, I'm going to go a little bit out of order. Usually we like to start the show out with looking at all the things that happened in the last week. But I think there's a more pressing discussion. Earlier this week, there was an MD from New York that came out, put out a video that has gone viral around the world, pleading with all the other MDs, nurses and doctors and scientists around the world, saying it looks like we may be doing more damage. We may be killing people with COVID-19. He said he didn't have the answers, but he was looking for the international community to step outside of the box, outside of the paradigm, and try and find a better way forward. This is what that video sounded like.
This is Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel, ER and critical care doctor from New York City. 9 days ago, I opened an intensive care unit to care for the sickest COVID-positive patients in this city. In these 9 days, I have seen things I have never seen before. In treating these patients, I have witnessed medical phenomenon that just don't make sense in the context of treating a disease that is supposed to be a viral pneumonia. 9 days ago, I presumed I was opening an intensive care unit to treat patients with a virus causing a pneumonia that was ravaging lungs across the world, starting out as something mild, a cough, a sore throat, and progressively increasing in severity until ultimately ending in something called acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. This is the paradigm that every hospital in the country is working under. And yet, everything I've seen in the last 9 days, all the things that just don't make sense, the patients I'm seeing in front of me, the lungs I'm trying to improve, have led me to believe that COVID-19 is not this disease, and that we are operating under a medical paradigm that is untrue. In short, I believe we are treating the wrong disease, and I fear that this misguided treatment will lead to a tremendous amount of harm to a great number of people in a very short time. As New York City appears to be about 10 days ahead of the country, I feel compelled to get this information out. COVID-19 lung disease, as far as I can see, is not a pneumonia and should not be treated as one. Rather, it appears as some kind of viral-induced disease, most resembling high-altitude sickness. It is as if tens of thousands of my fellow New Yorkers are on a plane at 30,000 feet and the cabin pressure is slowly being let out. These patients are slowly being starved of oxygen. I have seen patients dependent on oxygen take off their oxygen and quickly progress through a state of anxiety and emotional distress and eventually get blue in the face. And while they look like patients absolutely on the brink of death, they do not look like patients dying of pneumonia. I have never been a mountain climber, and I do not know the conditions at base camp below the highest peaks in the world. But I suspect that the patients I'm seeing in front of me look most like as if a person was dropped off on the top of Mount Everest without time to acclimate. I don't know the final answer of this disease, but I'm quite sure that a ventilator is not it.
That was Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel, literally almost apparently shouting from the rooftops. When I watched this video, I had some concerns because we had been getting inside reports from doctors saying things like everybody on a respirator dies from COVID-19, something that I had never heard before. And maybe had we not been getting reports like that, I might not have taken this video by Dr. Kyle Seidel so seriously. But there was something chilling about it, something honest about it. And it made me wonder, are we going to look back in history as this being a Paul Revere moment, a doctor, someone stepping out from inside the system saying, I think we're making a tragic mistake. He was later interviewed just a few days later by WebMD. Here is some of what he had to say when he was asked questions getting deeper into this conversation.
You say you see things that you've never seen before. What are some of those things that you're seeing?
When I initially started treating patients, I was under the impression, as most people were, that I was going to be treating acute respiratory distress syndrome that was similar in some sense to the ARDS that I saw as a fellow. And as I started to treat these patients, I witnessed things that are just unusual. And I'm sure doctors around the country are experiencing this. In the past, we don't see patients that are talking in full sentences and not complaining of overt shortness of breath with saturations in the high 70s. It's just not something we typically see. I've seen literally a saturation of 0 on a monitor, which is not something we ever want and something we actually actively try to avoid. The patients in front of me are unlike any patients I've ever seen. When we had a patient who had hit what we called our trigger to put in a breathing tube, meaning she had displayed a level of hypoxemia, of low oxygen levels, where we thought she would need a breathing tube. And most of the times when patients hit that level of hypoxemia, they're in distress and they can barely talk and they can't say complete sentences. And she could do all of those, and she did not want a breathing tube. And so she asked that we put it in at the last minute possible. And it was this perplexing clinical condition. When I was supposed to put the breathing tube in, when was the last minute possible? And all the instincts as a physician, we're looking to see if she, so-called tires out, if she's getting too tired. None of those things occurred. I came to realize that this condition is nothing I've ever seen before. And so I started to try to read. I sort of came upon decompression pulmonary sickness, which is, essentially the bends when divers dive and come up too quick, which seem to have some kind of a mirror picture clinically as these patients. And then, in discussions with other people, it came up that, they do similarly appear clinically. And this is not to say that the pathophysiology underlying it is similar, but clinically they look a lot more like high altitude sickness than do pneumonia. And Gattinoni, he published something on March 20th. By the time I read what he was saying, I'd come under the impression that this just wasn't the usual ARDS that we were used to seeing. He's suggesting that the management strategy that we use is essentially somewhat flipped, at least in these high compliant patients. We may be not operating under the right paradigm, which is
how have you changed your protocols then?
So to be honest, I've run into a great deal of resistance within my institution. These are the protocols that are in every major hospital and minor hospital. I mean, we generally
you talked about in your videos, against long-standing dogma. So what's been the response from your clinical colleagues as well as hospital administrators?
So to be honest, in the ICU, I started to try to run not my own protocols, but to treat patients as I would have treated my family under with a different goals, which is to say a ventilation. However, these didn't fit the protocol. And the protocol is what the hospital runs on, what the respiratory therapists, what the nurses. I mean, everyone is part of the team. And so actually we ran into an impasse where I could not morally in a patient-doctor relationship, I could not continue the current protocols, which again are the protocols at the top hospitals in the country. But I could not continue those. And obviously they couldn't have someone, you can't have one doctor just doing their own protocol. So I actually had to step down from my position in the ICU. And so now I'm back in the ER. As far as how we're going to switch is we're going to take our approach differently from the traditional ARDSNet protocol, in that we are going to do an oxygen first strategy.
I want to give a shout out and thank WebMD for that very thorough interview. You can go to WebMD to see the entire thing. Of course, we have just cut that down to bring the basic information to you.
Did you guys just hear what this doctor said in the early part of this interview? That everyone that was put on a ventilator died. But now you watch the mainstream media, Cuomo, however you pronounce his name, from New York, was screaming and shouting that he needs how many thousands of ventilators. So I have two questions. Cuomo and the rest of those Fauci and Fauci, whatever his name is, do these guys know that ventilator is actually exacerbating the problems? And if they do know, if they do know, and they are willfully and deliberately putting people on the ventilator that is killing them, so please tell me, why should we trust them? Why should we listen to them? Why should we trust their decisions? That's number one. Number two, if they do not know that ventilators are actually killing people, and yet you're mandating that people should get on these ventilators, my second question is, if they don't know, why should we trust them? Why should we listen to them? Number three, did you hear what this doctor just said? Apparently, working in the ICU, he had to go against some of their medical protocols. And because he chose to do his own thing that wasn't making sense, what the protocols that they told him to do was not helping. It was actually hurting and killing the patient. And he decided to do his own. Because of that, he had to step down from ICU and they put him into ER. I thank God for doctors and scientists like him who has backbone, who has integrity, who has a conscience, who has morals, and who have a brain to think outside of the medical box, the medical industry cult. Because it looks like it's a cult or a cabal or it is run by whoever. And unfortunately, many doctors, whether they are doing it willfully, deliberately, innocently, naively, stupidly, I don't know. But there are many other doctors, it's almost as if they are a medical robot. They will only regurgitate something because, oh, it came from the head and it came down. And you don't have brains to think for yourself. Thank God for doctors like these that will think and say, wait a second, this is not making sense. I know this is what it told me. I know this is what the science is. But what I'm looking at and what is happening to my patient is not lining up to what it told me. The information that came from the head down, the information that the American Medical Journal wrote, it is not adding up. And he began to question. I thank you, sir. I salute you. May every other doctors and anyone in the medical industry please begin to think. Don't just regurgitate what was handed down to you from the head down without you stopping to think and ask some questions. What is wrong with us? I thank God for people like this, and I'm asking that more doctors will step forth and begin to speak the truth and let the truth about this COVID be brought to light so people can have the right information to make the right decision concerning themselves, their family, and their livelihood. Because evidently, the mainstream media, and most people in the medical, I'm not saying all, but majority of those in the medical industry, especially in the head, the top big pharma, they have an agenda. And the agenda is, they know what the agenda is. I don't even have to tell you. But these decent doctors that are there are the ones who are saying, wait a second, this is not making sense. May more doctors begin to step forth and speak out and tell the truth so we can know exactly what's going on. Some of us already know. Thank God for discernment. Thank God for wisdom. And thank God for revelation from him. But we can't even just come and go on revelation because those, even Christians who are in the medical industry, they want to see science. They want to see facts. And the science said, who wrote the science? The people who wrote the science. Do you know their motives? Do you know their intentions? Do you know their agendas? You only know how to regurgitate what was told to you from the head down. Well, it's time for you to use your brain and think outside of the box. It's time for you to think outside of your medical cult box. Just like this doctor did. Thank you, sir. May more doctors that you come forth. Thank you. I'm going to put the link to the entire video. It's very interesting. This is over 2 hours long, I think. But it will be very good for you to sit and watch this entire program from beginning to end and share with anybody who needs to hear the truth. The guy who actually have this program, his name is Dale Bigtree, and his YouTube channel is called The High Wire. I will put the link there. Please listen up and share it. Thank you.